Podcast 2, Course Content. This is the second of 4 brief linked podcasts that just set you up for the revision sessions that will be running over the next 10 weeks. Okay, so in the previous podcast we looked at the resources, where you can find them, and the timeline over the 10 weeks. In this one, just a quick walk through the course content. It's really important at the beginning. Have a little checklist, get your folder in order, make sure you've got all the materials to revise from. Now obviously across the next 10 sessions I will be giving you PowerPoints and more revision materials to use, but it's just making sure your folder is well organised, you've got everything in the correct order for revision. So this is just going to take you through that. Basically, the Life in Germany unit, think of it in terms of 3 broad building blocks. Okay, building block 1 is the rise of the Nazi Party 1919 to 33. So effectively that's focusing in on the Weimar Republic. Why 1919? Because 1919 was the first year of peace after the end of World War I, which ended in 1918. Why 1933? Because in January 1933, Adolf Hitler came to power. So it's looking at the rise to power of the Nazi Party within the Weimar Republic, as we call it. Then the building blocks 2 and 3, looking at this diagram here, what they've both got in common are they're focusing more on Hitler in power. So building block 2, the government of the Third Reich, looks at how government was structured, the methods of control used by the Nazis, the SS and policing and terror and propaganda and so on and so forth. And then building block 3 looks at the social impact of the Third Reich. So that's looking at family policy, racial policy, and so on and so forth. Okay, so 3 building blocks. A bit more information on each of those. So there's building block 1, the rise of the Nazi Party to 1932. So as you can see, that in itself consists of 3 major blocks. So you've got the Weimar Republic there, 1919 to 23, the first 4 years, which is what we'll be focusing in on in the first revision session. Then you've got the impact of the economic problems, 1923 to 29, and then you've got increasing support for the Nazi Party from 1925 to 1932. And then within each of those, you've got a list of topics. I won't read all of those to you, you can read them yourself, but basically you should know something about each of those topics. In most instances, each of those listed topics should probably be at least one lesson, that you had one lesson. So for example, going to the first one, the German Revolution, 1918 to 1919, you should be saying to yourself, do I know enough about that to be able to write in the examination for at least 10 or 15 minutes? And it's the same with each of those. Do you know enough about the Weimar Constitution to write for 10 or 15 minutes? Even longer, do you know enough about the Treaty of Versailles for 10 or 15 minutes? Spartacists, and so on. Now, work your way through those, check them off. This is a personal checklist. And if you don't, if you think, I do not know anything about that, or I know very little about that, that is a warning signal to you, do something about it. Okay, if you don't, then you will pay the price when it comes to the final examination, because there will be a question on that topic and you do not want to be exposed to that. It is now only October, you've got many months to go, but you need to get this sorted by January for the mock. So if you've got any weak areas, you basically got to do the research, and all of my revision sessions will provide you material with material for that. There's the second building block, the same point. You've got 3 main topics: the creation of the Nazi state, Nazi methods of control, opposition and resistance to the Nazi government. Pause this podcast, have a quick read through those points, and each of those points, same principle, do you know enough to be able to write for 10 or 15 minutes on each of those listed topics there? So take any particular one. The Enabling Act, March 1933, do you know enough to be able to write for 10 or 15 minutes? The Gestapo, do you know enough, etc., etc. A lot of topics in there. Make sure that you're well prepared for that. And there's the third building block, exactly the same principle: Nazi policies towards women and the young, economic changes in Nazi Germany, and Nazi treatment of minorities. And then within each of those, a list of topics. Each topic, rule of thumb, 10 or 15 minutes. Do you know enough to write on each of those? Now, there are some areas which people are very traditionally exposed on, things like strength through joy, beauty of labour. People aren't particularly strong on things like the Wannsee Conference. Students aren't particularly strong on. So make sure you know that, but these revision sessions will take you through all of that. Okay, so that's a quick walk through the content of the Life in Germany unit and your responsibility to make sure you're well prepared. Thank you. If you go on now to the third podcast, which will look at past questions.